been almost a month since Paul Pelosi was brutally attacked at his home, and we're still missing a lot of details. But if you see corporate media's coverage of the attack, you'll be left with one thing. David DePape's a right-wing MAGA extremist.
David DePape was a fervent QAnon guy. He was a fervent Pizzagate believer that he thought he was doing something for the cause here.
Now, this part will not shock you. The alleged attacker posted conspiracy theories on Facebook, including links to multiple videos from the Trump ally and pillow salesman, Mike Lindell.
The suspect who trafficked online in far-right conspiracy theories about COVID and the 2020 election and Holocaust denialism.
But the New York Times seems to contradict that. We learned a little more about the deranged Canadian illegal in their new piece today. And a big thing we learned is that his girlfriend, Miss Taub, claims DePape didn't even follow politics when they met. Better yet, it wasn't until they dated that DePape quickly became immersed in the little counterculture of the left in Berkeley. They were fixtures at anti-war protests, nudist rallies. In fact, despite not being a citizen and not being able to vote, DePape was a Green Party member. He was registered to vote as a Green Party guy. Now, I didn't know illegal aliens could register to vote. I thought that was impossible, and voter fraud never happened. That's weird. He also talks to squirrels. I don't remember that being a part of the conservative platform. I might have missed it at the RNC, but probably didn't. Now, this does answer one thing for me. The guy was nuts. And don't right-wingers usually follow God? Not this guy. He follows a former insurance salesman from Michigan who practices a spirituality called Lazarus.
When you can find new ways to perceive the world, you can begin to perceive new worlds. More than perceiving reality differently, you can perceive new realities, different and new.
I don't remember seeing that guy at CPAC. Now, how is it that I know his made-up religion before we get the body cam footage? How is it that we know what animals he talks to, but I can't even get his mugshot or his rap sheet? Buck Sexton's a former CIA analyst who joins us now. I mean, the more we find out about this guy, it just gets even nuttier.
Yeah, he was a frequent attendee at the Crazy Town buffet. I mean, this guy has pulled together all these different conspiracy theories, literally, according to the New York Times, told people he was Jesus, lived under a tree, and thought he was living in a game simulation. But you'll notice also in that very lengthy New York Times article, Jesse, there's only one mention that I could find of mental illness or mental health, and it came from the defense attorney here. If this were a different circumstance and Democrats weren't obviously trying to weaponize this clear psychos act for political reasons, they'd be talking about how he's probably a schizophrenic, probably has major mental health issues. I think that's apparent to anyone. You don't actually need to have a PhD or an MD to see that, but that would get in the way of the narrative. And it also, by the way, is, I think, in keeping with their attitude here, which is that they only want to have certain facts out there in the discourse. We still don't know why is it that two different law enforcement agencies, the last time we talked, this came up, have different versions of the events that night. This was a very serious incident. The American people deserve to know all the facts, not just the ones that the media decides to share.
Well, we also found out that he was destroyed when his father abandoned him at an early age. And we're finding that is a common theme with a lot of these psychopaths and people that perpetrate violence or are drug addicted. Do you also find it interesting that as an illegal alien, he was able to register to vote in California? I thought that was not allowed.
That would be a problem. And obviously the fact that he is an illegal alien who attended nudist protests, was at one point a 9/11 truther, and I think you said was registered to the Green Party at one point. This is a person who was deeply troubled. That would be the polite way of saying it. In the NYPD, they would call it an emotionally disturbed person. But the point of all of this, unfortunately, I think has already worked for the Democrats, which was to, in the early stages, paint a picture of some right-wing guy. It's like he just came from a Tea Party protest. He's just another one of the people, another one of the conservatives out there. And I think a lot of people are tired of being lectured in this way, when it really comes down to the other side never taking any responsibility for what would be clear acts of political violence that are tied to much broader Democrat narratives. But when you have a total lunatic who might as well be speaking to pink elephants under the tree that he's living under, they are telling us this is the fault of the GOP. Hand over your guns and your freedom because of this maniac? I don't think so.
Yeah, Gavin should have deported this guy or at least institutionalized them, because when you're swinging hammers at people, gobbling up psychedelics, think you're Jesus and living under a spruce tree, maybe take some of the tax money and spend it on cleaning up crime. Maybe, just an idea. Could be crazy. Buck Sexton, thanks for joining us.